I saw the smudge of cheap crimson lipstick on the rim of the heavy crystal tumbler, sitting carelessly on my husband Julian's mahogany desk. It wasn't my shade. Mine was always a sophisticated matte nude. This was glossy, synthetic, and defiantly wrong. That tiny, careless smear was the starting gun for the destruction of my entire world, the physical evidence that my reality was a lie. There are days, aren't there, when a single second fractures your timeline forever, splitting your life into before and after. I stood there, holding that glass, feeling the cold weight of the crystal mirroring the absolute zero of panic in my chest. Before I dive into the rest of this brutal story, I need a moment with you. Where are you listening from right now? Tell me your city and what time it is. Knowing we share this moment across miles helps me breathe, reminding me that even in the deepest isolation, there is community. My name is Sarah, and until 6 months ago, I was living what everyone called the perfect life in upstate New York. Julian and I had the house, the careers, the enviable marriage, the kind of union that felt absolutely unshakable. He was charming, successful, and publicly adored me. I trusted him implicitly. I trusted Lisa, too, our neighbor just 2 houses down, the one who always brought over freshly baked lemon bars and borrowed my gardening tools, laughing about the joys of suburban life. That trust, that blind, stupid confidence born of comfort and routine, is precisely what allowed the rot to flourish right under my nose. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about the hard truths here, the ones that break you, but eventually reshape you into something exponentially stronger. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the quiet terror of realizing your partner is a stranger, hit the like button and subscribe. I promise to share every painful detail of how I went from the devastated wife who found a lipstick stain to the woman who systematically took back everything she deserved. We had our rhythm, a predictable comfort that felt like the ultimate safety net. We had Monday night dinners at our favorite Italian place downtown, Saturday morning runs through the park, and we spent hours planning our next major trip, whether it was to the vineyards of Tuscany or the beaches of the Caribbean. Julian was my rock. He was the man who held my hand through my mother's illness, the one who remembered the tiny, specific details about my history that even I sometimes forgot. That level of intimacy breeds a dangerous kind of comfort, the kind where you stop inspecting the foundations because you assume they are solid granite. When you love someone that deeply, you stop looking for the holes. You become a complacent participant in the illusion of perfection. The relationship was so established, so mature, that I never felt the need to check his whereabouts or scrutinize his phone. Why would I? That was the realm of insecure, new relationships, not ours. But the cracks started small, almost imperceptible at first. The first signs were merely shifts in his behavior. Nothing you could point to and call proof, just a persistent unease that began nesting in my gut. He began leaving his phone face down, a new, sudden habit. Before, his phone was just another object. Now it felt like a protected vault. If I walked into the study unexpectedly while he was scrolling, his hand would instantly dart out, covering the screen, or he'd quickly close an app, his face flushing faintly. He claimed it was work stress, sensitive client data, but the jumpiness was new, foreign to his normally relaxed demeanor. Then came the disappearances, the crucial all-day strategy meetings that were hours away, the golf trips that suddenly required him to stay overnight, always claiming that the traffic back to the city was too brutal on a Sunday evening. He'd come back smelling vaguely of hotel soap and something else, a perfume I couldn't quite place, something too cheap and too sweet, masked poorly by his expensive usual cologne. It smelled like youth and desperation, and it clung to his clothes like guilt. When I finally gathered the courage to ask about the strange scent, he snapped at me, a rare, shocking occurrence that left me reeling. "Are you checking up on me, Sarah? We agreed we don't do that. You're being paranoid. I immediately backed off, ashamed that I had even questioned the perfect man. I apologized, desperate to smooth over the tension, desperate to restore the peace. But the tightness in my chest wouldn't dissipate. The silence between us became heavy, filled not with peace, but with unspoken questions and a mounting sense of dread. He was physically present, yes, but emotionally, he had already packed his bags and moved out of our marriage. I tried to convince myself it was just a phase, the midlife anxieties everyone talks about. I desperately wanted to believe the excuses he fed me, because the truth felt like a monster I wasn't ready to face. That Tuesday morning, we kissed goodbye as usual. Julian was heading to what he called a crucial all-day strategy meeting across the state line in New Jersey. I was set for a long day of remote legal work, stacks of case files waiting for my attention. But by 11 a.m., the migraine hit, the kind that makes the world spin and the light feel like a physical assault. I couldn't focus. I couldn't see straight. I knew I wouldn't get any productive work done, and certainly couldn't drive through rush hour later with my head pounding like this. The only solution was to cancel my afternoon conference call, skip the commute traffic, and drive straight back to our sanctuary, hoping a quiet, dark room would offer immediate relief. I didn't text him. Why would I? He was supposedly tied up in a meeting hours away until dinner time. I just wanted my bed, quiet, and a few hours of absolute darkness. I drove the short distance home, my head throbbing in rhythm with the engine. I pulled into the driveway, surprised to see his familiar sedan already parked in the garage. That's strange, I thought, pushing the button for the automatic opener. He must have forgotten a document. It was the last moment of pure, innocent delusion I would ever experience. I parked my car, reached for my briefcase, and stepped onto the clean cement floor of our garage, ready for nothing more sinister than silence and aspirin. But the moment I stepped inside, the air shifted, heavy and warm, carrying a scent that instantly canceled out the pain of the migraine. It was the cloying, cheap perfume, stronger now, inescapable. And then I heard it. A sound that was absolutely not the sound of a man retrieving a forgotten document. I had rushed home, blaming the throbbing behind my eyes, a debilitating textbook migraine. But the real, practical reason was a critical signed contract I'd forgotten, needed desperately for a 9 a.m. meeting the next morning. I needed to grab the document from the dining room table, take 2 aspirin, and either get back to the office or collapse until dawn. The sound I heard, however, was not the measured click of David retrieving a forgotten flash drive. It was a soft, rhythmic thud, followed by a low, almost guttural moan that instantly clarified everything my subconscious had been trying to ignore for months. My briefcase dropped from my numb fingers, hitting the polished concrete of the garage floor with a hollow thwack. The sound echoed, loud enough to be heard, yet they were too engrossed, too reckless to notice. I stood absolutely still, processing the fact that David's black SUV was parked slightly crooked in his usual spot, a clear violation of his own rigid rules, and that the air was currently saturated with that sickeningly sweet, cheap perfume. It wasn't a trace this time. It was a blanket, suffocating and repulsive. My own scent of sophisticated lavender and sandalwood was completely overpowered. The migraine instantly vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp, terrifying clarity. I didn't rush. Rushing would imply panic, and I was beyond panic. I was calculating. I slipped off my heels, expensive pumps suddenly useless for the task ahead, and walked toward the utility room entrance. The interior of the house was saturated with a thick, repulsive silence, a pressure cooker of guilt and careless desire. I could hear the faint sounds now, the rustle of sheets, the hushed, clumsy whispers. I didn't need to see the scene. I felt the betrayal vibrating through the very foundation of our home. I ascended the main staircase, gripping the carved banister. Every step was deliberate, a conscious severance from the woman I had been just 5 minutes ago. I wasn't moving quickly, but with an agonizing, meticulous slowness that felt like watching time warp and shatter. The door to our master bedroom, the sanctuary where we had built our life and our family, was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm yellow light falling onto the plush hallway rug. I pushed the door open, not violently, but with a smooth, controlled motion. It wasn't rage that choked me. It was the shocking, ugly banality of it all. They weren't hiding. David, my husband, the man who had delivered a flawless eulogy at my father's funeral just last year, was there, tangled in the duvet. His face was flushed, his eyes wide with a combination of arousal and sheer idiotic terror, as he realized the light had shifted. And beside him, Sarah. Not a faceless stranger, not a mysterious colleague, but Sarah, our neighbor. The woman who lived 2 doors down, whose children played soccer with mine. The woman I had shared countless coffees and confidential gossip with. Her cheap, gaudy jewelry lay scattered on the nightstand, glinting under the lamp. The scene was less about passion and more about careless, repulsive convenience. David's face crumpled first. He tried to lunge for the sheets, sputtering something incoherent. Sarah predictably tried to burrow deeper into the pillows, pulling the duvet over her head like a terrified child. I did not scream. I did not drop to my knees. I did not cry. My breath hitched only once, a sharp intake that quickly settled into a measured rhythm. The betrayal was a physical wound, but the strategic mind that had built my career took over instantly. I reached into the pocket of my blazer, pulling out my phone. I didn't utter a word of accusation. I didn't need to. I simply opened the camera app. The soft, low click of the shutter was the sound that brought the entire room crashing down. "What are you doing, Emily? Stop! Put that down!" David hissed, scrambling to cover himself, his voice raw with panic. I ignored him completely. I began to film the room, moving slowly, deliberately, ensuring every detail was captured. The rumpled, expensive sheets, the 2 sets of clothes carelessly tossed near the dresser, Sarah's distinctive, hideous red purse lying beside David's watch. I kept the camera steady, making sure to capture the stunned, horrified look on David's face as he realized I wasn't an emotional wreck. I was a prosecutor gathering evidence. I took 3 more photos, then shifted the phone to video mode, ensuring the ambient sounds of their panicked whispers and my own steady breathing were recorded. I wasn't interested in their shame. I was interested in the financial and legal leverage this evidence provided. I took 2 steps back, never breaking eye contact with David, whose panicked pleas were starting to become desperate. "Don't move," I stated, my voice low and utterly steady, carrying an authority David had never heard from me before. "Don't touch anything. Don't speak." I closed the door gently, firmly. The sound of the lock clicking was the definitive, cold, metallic end of the 12 years we had spent building this life. I didn't move far. I leaned against the hallway wall, my phone still recording, through the closed door, capturing the muffled, frantic argument that had now erupted between the 2 traitors inside. My next move was the most crucial. Sarah was not single. She was married to Thomas, a truly decent man, a kind father, an unsuspecting man who was likely sitting in his own kitchen 2 houses down, oblivious. I scrolled through my contacts, my fingers steady. It was time for Thomas to know exactly why his wife would not be home for dinner. The evidence was secured. Now it was time to forge the necessary alliance. "This is not a confrontation, David. This is a business transaction, and I am closing your accounts." I told my assistant I was leaving early. It wasn't a lie. A massive pulsating migraine had seized the back of my skull, the kind that made the fluorescent lights of the office feel like shards of glass. I needed darkness, silence, and the specific medication I kept only in the bathroom cabinet at home. That was my logical, undeniable reason for driving back into our quiet suburban street at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday. As I pulled into the driveway, the tension in my head eased slightly, replaced by a strange, low hum of unease. David's sedan was parked in the garage. Odd. He had a critical budget presentation scheduled that afternoon, one he'd been preparing for weeks. I rationalized it immediately. Maybe he forgot a key document and rushed back. Maybe he felt sick too. I parked my car, pulling the keys from the ignition, and the oppressive silence of the house hit me. It wasn't the welcoming, empty silence of a working home. It was a heavy, saturated quiet. I took off my heels in the foyer, immediately regretting the decision as the carpet muffled my approach, making me feel like a ghost in my own dwelling. My mission was the medicine, but a new, unidentifiable scent was curling in the air, pulling me toward the stairs. It wasn't my light, citrusy perfume. It was sweet, cloying, heavy, a cheap, musky vanilla, Sarah's scent. I remembered standing next to her at a PTA meeting, wondering why she wore such a loud fragrance. The stairs seemed endless. With every step, the throbbing behind my eyes subsided, replaced by a cold, metallic clarity in my chest. I reached the landing. The door to our master bedroom was slightly ajar. I stopped breathing, listening, but heard nothing except the rapid thump-thump of my own heart threatening to escape my ribs. I didn't knock. I didn't call out David's name. I placed my hand on the cool brass knob and pushed the heavy oak door inward, just enough for a clean, unobstructed view. The afternoon sun, usually so gentle through the sheer curtains, seemed intent on illuminating every horrifying detail. The sight was immediate, sickeningly vivid, and utterly conclusive. There they were, David and Sarah, not whispering, not arguing, not attempting to be discreet. They were, tangled in the white cotton of our duvet, their bodies a map of betrayal. The world didn't spin, the air didn't rush out of my lungs. The migraine, the panic, the fear, it all evaporated, replaced by a surgical, terrifying calm. I was watching a scene unfold, but I was no longer an actress in it. I was the director, standing back, analyzing the composition. They didn't see me immediately. They were too immersed in their grotesque little bubble. David's face, usually so composed, was slack with self-indulgence. Sarah's hair was fanned out across my pillow. It was the visual confirmation of every single doubt, every misplaced anxiety, every late-night worry I had ever swallowed down. The scream that wanted to tear through my throat was silenced by pure, strategic instinct. No. I would not give them the satisfaction of my tears or my fury. I would not allow them to minimize this moment with rushed apologies. My left hand went into my purse, steady as rock, retrieving my phone. I didn't even look at the screen. I flipped the camera app to video and held the device perfectly still, my arm rigid. I zoomed in just slightly, ensuring their shocked faces, the proximity of their bodies, and David's carelessly discarded wedding band resting on the mahogany nightstand were all captured. The little red recording dot blinked furiously. It was the minuscule whirring sound of the digital recording that finally broke the silence and alerted them. David's head snapped up first. The look of pleasure curdled instantly into absolute stomach-turning horror. Sarah followed, scrambling, reaching frantically for the sheet. "Gail, wait!" David choked out, trying to sit up, his face a mask of scarlet shame. I did not speak. I did not move. I simply maintained the recording, letting the silence and the lens of my camera do the devastating work. Their futile panic, their attempts to cover themselves, their naked guilt. It was all mine now. Proof immutable. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds, I felt the evidence was secured. My purpose was achieved. I slowly lowered the phone, not breaking eye contact with my husband, whose eyes were wide and pleading. I offered him nothing. Not anger, not pain, just the cold, hard void of complete abandonment. Then, I took one slow step back, closing the door firmly. I didn't slam it. I simply let the latch catch. And then, with the deliberate precision of a bank vault being secured, I reached into the pocket of my coat, pulled out the small brass key I carried, and locked the bedroom door from the outside. The audible click echoed down the hallway, the sound of their confinement, the sound of my freedom. They were trapped, not physically, but ethically, morally, and soon, legally. I descended the stairs, leaving them to their panic and their shame. I bypassed the living room and went straight to the kitchen counter, grabbing a glass of water, my hands still miraculously steady. I had the evidence. Now, I needed the alliance. I scrolled through my contacts, my mind already 5 steps ahead, calculating the geometry of their downfall. Thomas, Sarah's husband, 2 houses down, likely oblivious, probably planning his own dinner menu. He was a decent man, a kind father. He deserved the same courtesy I had just denied David, the courtesy of the truth, delivered without emotion. I pressed the call button. It rang twice. "Thomas," I said, my voice low, composed, and utterly devoid of the rage simmering beneath my skin. "It's Gail. I apologize for interrupting your day, but I need you to come home right now. Something has happened involving David and Sarah. I have the proof, and I assure you, you do not want to hear this over the phone. Please just drive straight here. I'll be waiting in the kitchen." I hung up before he could articulate his confusion. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. It feels like a century has passed since I hung up the phone on Gail, yet the metallic taste of betrayal still coats my tongue, fresh and agonizing. David and Sarah are still trapped inside my guest bedroom, oblivious to the meticulous web I've woven around them. But to understand the sheer tectonic shift that occurred, I have to go back just a few hours, back to the moment the perfect facade of my life shattered. I wasn't supposed to be home that Tuesday afternoon. I had a full schedule of back-to-back client meetings in the city, but by 2 o'clock, a skull-splitting migraine had started, the kind that blurs vision and makes noise intolerable. My final meeting was rescheduled, and driving back to our quiet suburban street felt like the only solution. I just needed the dark, cool silence of our bedroom. That was my logical, mundane reason for returning early, the tiny crack in the universe that allowed me to glimpse the horror hidden beneath. As I pulled the Mercedes into the driveway, I noticed David's black sedan was already parked in the garage, slightly askew. That was my first warning, a subtle, freezing prickle on my skin. He had told me he was flying to Denver for a 2-day conference. Maybe he'd forgotten his briefcase? Maybe the flight was delayed? I told myself these rational lies as I used my key, the silence inside the house hitting me like a physical barrier. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of an empty home. It was a pressurized, held-breath silence. I kicked off my heels by the front door, the heavy thud echoing unnaturally in the foyer. The house smelled wrong. It was a smell I knew intimately, but it did not belong here. Sarah's signature scent, a sickeningly sweet blend of gardenia and ozone that she always oversprayed. My heart, which had been beating a dull rhythm of pain from the migraine, suddenly leaped into a frantic, chaotic dance. I ascended the marble staircase, each step a slow, deliberate march towards a truth I desperately didn't want to face. The air grew warmer, thicker, the scent of Sarah's perfume stronger. I stopped outside the guest room, the door slightly ajar. David always used that room as his home office during the pandemic, but the sound coming from inside, wasn't the tapping of a keyboard. It was a low, intimate murmur, punctuated by a familiar laugh, Sarah's laugh. The world narrowed to the trembling of my hand, resting on the smooth brass doorknob. My brain, usually so sharp and analytical, went completely numb. It was the body reacting before the mind. I didn't push the door. I simply nudged it open just enough to see. And there they were. They weren't just kissing, and this was not a moment of weakness or drunken mistake. They were entrenched, their bodies twisted together on the worn leather of the antique chaise lounge I had inherited from my grandmother. Sarah, my neighbor, my confidant, the woman I had trusted to watch my dogs and listen to my deepest secrets, was tangled with my husband David, the man who had promised me forever under a Tuscan sun. The shock wasn't a loud explosion. It was a silent implosion. It was the feeling of every single molecule in my body stopping, freezing in place. I didn't feel anger yet, or sorrow. I felt only cold, absolute clarity. The details etched themselves into my memory. The terrible casualness of their entanglement. The smirk on David's face as he whispered something to her. The way Sarah's hand was resting on his shoulder, completely at ease in my home, in my life. In that instant, I knew screaming was useless. Tears were a waste of valuable time. They deserved to be humiliated, ruined, not afforded the satisfaction of seeing me break. David had always underestimated my resolve, thinking my emotional nature was a weakness. He was about to learn that my emotions were simply fuel for a much sharper fire. My right hand, steady as stone, slipped into my purse. I pulled out my phone, unlocked the camera, and started recording. I zoomed in just enough to capture their faces, their recognizable clothing, and the unmistakable setting of my guest room. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, maybe only 30 seconds, recording the proof, the undeniable, irrefutable evidence that would destroy their carefully constructed lies. I was the silent, invisible witness, the lens of judgment. When the recording was secure, I slowly, silently pulled the door shut, the click of the latch sounding impossibly loud in the echoing hallway. I didn't leave them space to react, to dress, or to formulate an excuse. The lock on that door was solid. They were my prisoners now, caged in a gilded room full of lies and cheap perfume. I walked back down the stairs, retrieved my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen island. I pulled up Sarah's contact information and found the number for her husband, Gale. He was a good man, a dedicated father, utterly devoted to Sarah. He deserved the same courtesy David and Sarah had denied me. The truth, delivered cold and hard. My voice, when I called him moments later, was unnervingly calm. It was the voice of a CEO announcing a hostile takeover, not a betrayed wife. Gale, I apologize for interrupting your day, but I need you to come home right now. Something has happened involving David and Sarah. I have the proof, and I assure you, you do not want to hear this over the phone. Please just drive straight here. I'll be waiting in the kitchen. I hung up before he could articulate his confusion. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. It had been a chaotic Tuesday morning, the kind where every meeting was scheduled back to back and the fluorescent lights in the office felt like drills boring into my skull. A crushing migraine hit me just after lunch, the type that makes you crave immediate darkness and silence. I called my assistant, canceled the rest of my appointments, grabbed my briefcase, and drove the 20 minutes back to our quiet, upscale neighborhood in Dallas. David was supposed to be at a site inspection until late afternoon. I was looking forward to peace. 2 extra-strength painkillers, and maybe collapsing on this sofa. But the moment I pulled into the driveway, something felt wrong. David's big black pickup truck wasn't parked straight in its usual spot. It was tucked aggressively close to the garage wall, almost hidden from the street. My first thought was annoyance. Why was he home early when he knew I needed the day off? I called out his name as I stepped inside, the heavy front door thudding shut behind me. "David, are you here?" Only the profound silence of an empty house answered. Usually, our golden retriever, Scout, would erupt in a welcoming frenzy, but the house was still, unnaturally so. I called for Scout too, but nothing. Then I smelled it. Not his usual familiar warm cedar cologne, but something floral, something cloyingly sweet and utterly foreign to our shared air. It was a scent I recognized immediately. A sickeningly expensive French perfume that Sarah, our neighbor and my supposedly close friend, always wore. It hung heavy in the air, a poisonous plume rising subtly from the staircase. My migraine vanished, replaced by an electric, terrifying clarity. My feet felt suddenly heavy, glued to the Persian runner in the entryway. Denial is a powerful force, but sensory input is louder. I forced myself to move. Every step up the polished oak stairs felt like a deliberate act of violence against myself. Each creak a mockery of the life I thought I had built. I gripped the railing, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic prisoner demanding release. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit, but the master bedroom door was ajar, just enough to show a bright, intrusive strip of light spilling onto the carpet. I didn't knock. I didn't pause. I pushed the door open, slowly, deliberately, controlling the speed of the catastrophe I was about to witness. The sight wasn't a cheap, dramatic scene from a movie. It was a brutal, intimate tableau that ripped reality from under my feet. David, my husband, the man whose ring I wore, tangled with Sarah, the woman who had shared wine with me in this very room just last week. They were oblivious, lost in their wretched moment, right there in the bed we shared, under the quilt I had bought us on our anniversary trip to Santa Fe. The shock was not a scream. It was a physical vacuum. My lungs emptied. The world went utterly mute, replaced by a high-pitched ringing. In that brief, crucial window before they saw me, before they registered the disaster I represented, instinct took over. Hysteria was what they expected. Tears were what they deserved. I gave them neither. My hand found my phone in my pocket. My focus narrowed instantly, cutting out the noise, the shame, the devastating betrayal. I raised the device, my hands steady as stone, and pressed record. I filmed them clearly, the light catching their horrified faces as David finally looked up and saw me, eyes wide with the recognition of his destruction. I captured the distinct pattern of my quilt beneath them, Sarah's flushed, panicked expression. I let the phone record for 10 agonizing seconds, ensuring I had undeniable proof. Then, with a deadly surgical calm that surprised even me, I stepped back, closed the door, and twisted the lock. The click of the mechanism was loud and final. I heard David finally shout my name, muffled and panicked, followed by the sound of him scrambling off the bed, rattling the locked handle. Too late. The witnesses were secured. I walked back downstairs, my legs operating purely on muscle memory, carrying me past the lingering scent of betrayal. I needed to breathe, but my chest felt compressed by concrete. The first thing I did after locking them in was call Ben, Sarah's husband. He was probably stuck in his high-rise law office downtown, reviewing contracts, blissfully unaware that his life was also collapsing. My voice was eerily steady, devoid of the emotion that was churning my stomach into acid. "Ben, it's Amelia. I need you to come to my house right now. Drop everything. No questions. Just drive straight here. I'll be waiting in the kitchen." I didn't offer comfort or explanation. He had to face this truth cold. I hung up before he could articulate his confusion. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. The headache hit me around 3 o'clock, a relentless spike behind my left eye that made the fluorescent lights of the accounting firm feel like shrapnel. I hadn't felt that kind of blinding, debilitating pain in years, and I knew fighting it would only ruin the rest of my week. I quietly told my assistant I was calling it an early day, packed my briefcase, and drove the 20 minutes back to our quiet, tree-lined street in Willow Creek. It was an anomaly. I was never home before David. He ran his construction consultancy and always scheduled late client meetings, often not pulling into the garage until after 7. I pulled my sedan into the driveway, immediately frowning. David's black SUV was already parked inside the closed garage. Odd, I thought, pushing the button for the automatic door. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself maybe he'd been called off a site early. Maybe he was taking a conference call in the home office. I walked through the mudroom, dropping my keys onto the ceramic tile, with a sharp clang that usually earned a groan from David if he was working upstairs. Silence. A strange, thick, cotton wool silence enveloped the entire house, far. Too quiet for a weekday afternoon. The house smelled wrong. It wasn't the clean, light lemon scent of the floor cleaner Maria used, or the faint, familiar aroma of David's expensive sandalwood cologne. This was cloying, sickly sweet, a cheap, aggressive floral scent I recognized instantly. Sarah's perfume. My stomach lurched, a cold, hard knot forming beneath my ribs. Sarah, our neighbor, my supposed confidant, the woman I shared coffee with every Thursday morning. Why would Sarah be here? Why would her perfume saturate the air, heavy and inescapable, reaching all the way down to the first floor? I moved slowly, deliberately, leaving the briefcase where it lay. The sound of my own footsteps on the oak staircase seemed deafening in the unnatural quiet. With every step toward the landing, the air grew heavier, the silence more menacing. I passed the guest room, the door closed. Then the home office, also closed. My heart wasn't pounding. It was doing something much worse. It was sinking, heavy and slow, confirming a truth I hadn't yet allowed my mind to formulate. The blinding pain in my head had completely vanished, replaced by an unnerving, icy clarity. The smell was strongest outside our master bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, maybe an inch, resting gently against the frame. I didn't push it open immediately. I reached into the deep pocket of my trousers, my fingers brushing against the cold glass of my phone. I unlocked it, opened the camera app, and started recording video, holding the device low and steady. I pushed the door open just enough to see. The world shattered into a slow-motion kaleidoscope of reds and browns. The rich mahogany of our headboard, the burgundy silk of the duvet, and the tangled limbs of the two people who were supposed to be the most trusted figures in my life. David looked up first, his eyes wide and vacant, the shock wiping away any pretense of passion or pleasure. Sarah was a mess of tangled blonde hair and cheap perfume, grasping desperately for the sheets, her face flushing crimson as she registered my presence. It wasn't the image itself that broke me. It was the sheer, mundane casualness of their betrayal in my space, on my marital bed. The audacity was suffocating. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the phone. I kept recording, panning slowly to capture the full scope of their humiliation, the scattered clothing, the look of abject terror on David's face. The man who swore eternal fidelity just last Saturday. Get dressed, I said, my voice unnaturally level, devoid of tremor, sounding like a recording played back at half speed. I stepped fully into the room, holding the phone steady. They scrambled, tripping over each other in their panic. David tried to approach me, mumbling incoherent apologies, trying to block the camera lens. I simply held up my hand, a stop sign forged of ice. Don't touch me. Don't speak. Just get dressed. As they fumbled with their clothes, hands shaking violently, I took 2 decisive steps back, pulled the heavy oak door shut with a solid thud, and twisted the key hard in the lock. Click. They were trapped. They were contained. I leaned my back against the smooth hardwood of the door, allowing myself one deep, shuddering breath, tasting the sweet, tainted air of Sarah's cheap perfume for the last time. The first thing I did after securing the door wasn't cry or rage. It was dialing. I found Michael's number, Sarah's husband, listed under family friends. He was a kind, quiet man, completely devoted to his wife, running his own successful landscaping business. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, Amelia, everything all right?" My voice was clinical, stripped of all warmth. "Michael, I am calling you from my home. I need you to listen very carefully and not interrupt me. David and Sarah are currently locked inside my master bedroom. They have been having an affair, and I have evidence. I want you to come here immediately. Do not call Sarah. Do not call David. Just drive." He didn't offer comfort or explanation. He had to face this truth cold. I hung up before he could articulate his confusion. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. The migraine hit me like a physical blow, a spike of white-hot, relentless pain right behind my left eye. David had assured me he would be downtown until at least 10, finalizing the merger details with the Sterling Group. I was supposed to be doing the same, working remotely from my home office on the legal brief, but the light was a dagger, and the screen felt like sandpaper against my retina. There was no fighting it. I needed darkness and silence, and I needed them immediately. I sent David a curt text. "Severe migraine. Heading home now. Don't worry." I didn't wait for a reply, simply gathered my laptop, grabbed my purse, and navigated the 30-minute drive back to our quiet, tree-lined street in Hinsdale. The house was supposed to be empty. It was 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, the pinnacle of the working week. But as I pulled into the driveway, the first sharp anomaly pierced the fog of my pain. Sarah's small blue sedan was parked clumsily, half hidden behind our massive black SUV. Sarah, our neighbor. The woman I had shared countless coffees, garden tips, and genuine marital worries with. The woman I had trusted so implicitly, I gave her a key to my home for emergencies. The silence that greeted me when I unlocked the front door was deafening, heavy, and unnatural. It didn't feel like an empty house. It felt like a held breath. My usual citrus and sandalwood scent, the expensive candle I always kept burning, was suffocated beneath something else. A strange, musky sweetness, cheap and cloying. A perfume I didn't recognize, clinging to the air like dust. I tried to rationalize it. She must have stopped by to water the plants or drop off the casserole dish she borrowed. But the way my chest constricted, the sudden, icy drop in my stomach, told me that lie wouldn't hold. I mounted the grand oak staircase, the thick carpet muffling my steps until I was little more than a ghost, ascending the scene of my own execution. Every footfall was a measured, agonizing beat. The migraine had vanished, replaced by a hyper-vigilance that felt like electricity running through my nerves. The door to our master bedroom, the sanctuary of our 11 years together, was not fully closed. It sat ajar, maybe 3 inches open. I stopped breathing entirely. Through that narrow slice of light, I saw it. A flash of white linen, the duvet pulled askew, and then the unmistakable sight of a man's bare back, David's back. Those shoulders I knew by heart, tense, moving with a rhythm that had nothing to do with comfort or rest. And entwined with him, her bright, brassy blonde hair splayed across my custom silk pillows. Sarah. The world didn't tilt or spin. It stopped. My mind didn't scream or rage. It went clinically, terrifyingly cold. This was not shock. This was instant, lethal calculus. It wasn't just the act. It was the chosen locale, the vulgarity of their intimacy happening right there, in the very bed where we had planned our future, where we had shared our vulnerabilities. My hand reached for my phone, not to call for help, not to yell obscenities, but to document. This was not a moment for emotional outbursts. It was a crime scene demanding precise evidence. I pushed the door open just enough to frame the picture, the faces, the surroundings, the sickening conjunction of their bodies, and hit record. My hand was steady, my breathing barely perceptible. I allowed the camera to capture the full, raw minute of their transgression. They were so consumed, so careless, that they didn't even notice the faint, soft click of the phone's focus, adjusting. When David finally raised his head, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, his eyes met mine across the room. The transition on his face, from base pleasure to pure liquid terror, was instantaneous and immensely satisfying. I held the gaze, stopped the recording, and gave him nothing. Not a sound, not a flicker of pain. I performed the mechanical act of stepping back, pulling the heavy door shut, and inserting the key into the lock I had installed years ago for privacy, but which now served a far more critical purpose. Click. They were trapped, sealed within the consequences of their arrogance. I descended the stairs without rushing, my high heels clicking a steady rhythm on the wooden steps, past Sarah's stupid blue sedan sitting like a monument to betrayal. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked straight to the kitchen counter, my movements precise. I needed Mark, Sarah's husband, a good man, a dedicated father, and, ironically, David's colleague at the firm. I found his number quickly, stored under the professional title M. Peterson Acquisitions. I dialed. My voice, when I spoke, was a flat, controlled monotone, devoid of any discernible emotion. Mark, it's Emily. I apologize for calling you at work, but I need you to come to my house immediately. There's been an emergency regarding Sarah and David. No, don't ask questions. Just drive now. You need to see this. I cut the connection before he could articulate the confusion and budding fear in his voice. I didn't offer comfort or explanation. He had to face this truth cold. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, physically trapped, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. The blinding throbbing behind my eyes was the only reason I drove back home at 2:30 p.m. I'd tried to power through the board meeting, but the fluorescent lights of the downtown office complex started feeling like physical spikes driven into my skull. David knew I wouldn't be back until 7, maybe 8 tonight. I had left my specialized migraine medication in the bathroom cabinet, a small, dark bottle that held the key to my temporary relief. I needed it, and I needed silence. Pulling my Mercedes into the quiet familiarity of our suburban driveway felt like a retreat, a surrender to pain. But then I saw it. David's black SUV, parked slightly crookedly in the garage, the automatic door wide open. A flicker of confusion mixed with the pain. He had told me he was spending the entire afternoon across town, finalizing the contract on the new development site. Why was he home? The sight of his vehicle immediately cut through the dense fog of my headache, sharpening my senses into an unnatural focus. The front door was unlocked. That was the second sign. David was meticulous about security, a habit drilled into him by years of construction site vigilance. He never left the door unsecured, even if he was just taking the garbage out. I stepped inside. The silence was immediate, heavy, and wrong. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of an empty house. It was the suffocating stillness of a scene that had just been frozen. I kicked off my heels by the mudroom and paused, inhaling deeply, trying to pinpoint the source of the strangeness. That's when it hit me. A wave of cheap, sickly sweet fragrance. It wasn't my usual Jo Malone citrus scent, nor was it David's light aftershave. This was a heavy, overwhelming floral musk, the kind that clings to cheap synthetic fabrics. It was Sarah's perfume. My neighbor, Sarah, the woman who had borrowed my sugar just last Tuesday, the one whose kids played with my nephew. My heart began a sluggish, heavy drum against my ribs. It wasn't panic yet. It was denial fighting a losing battle against the mounting evidence. She must have just dropped by to return something, I told myself, trying to rationalize the perfume and the car. Maybe she needed David to fix something. But my feet didn't move toward the kitchen or the living room. They moved, slowly, deliberately, toward the carpeted staircase leading to our master suite. Each step was unnaturally quiet on the thick pile. I heard nothing. No television, no music, no low murmur of conversation that would explain a friendly visit. Only the frantic, roaring pulse in my own ears. The door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar. I stopped just outside, my body suddenly light, disconnected from the floor. I held my breath, pushing the throbbing pain aside, needing absolute clarity for what I was about to witness. I didn't want to see it, yet some terrible, morbid curiosity, a survival instinct demanding truth, forced my hand forward. I pushed the heavy oak door open just enough to see inside. The afternoon sun streamed through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, and the horrific tableau on our king-sized bed. There he was. David. My husband. The man who vowed forever. Whose scent I knew better than my own. Whose ring glittered on my finger. And there she was. Sarah. Her bright red hair spilled across my antique lace pillowcases. They were entwined, a cheap, ugly parody of intimacy. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was the casual, effortless way they occupied our space, desecrating the one sanctuary I thought was sacred. The sight didn't make me scream. It extracted all the air from my lungs and replaced it with a block of glacial ice. For a split second, the world tilted. The sounds muffled, a soft, repetitive sigh. The rustle of our expensive Egyptian cotton sheets seemed miles away. My brain, however, was functioning at warp speed, cold and precise. Screaming would only give them the chance to compose themselves, to lie, to beg. Crying would make me weak. I had to be a witness, a documentarian, a prosecutor. My hand, steady as a surgeon's, slipped into the pocket of my blazer. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it with the silent fingerprint sensor, and immediately hit record on the video function. I held the phone up, keeping my body hidden by the jam, letting the camera lens drink in every horrifying detail. The position of their hands, the expression of pure, selfish pleasure on David's face, the familiarity with which they moved together. I filmed the whole scene for nearly 45 seconds, Proof undeniable, time-stamped, and devastating. I lowered the phone, the cold metal grounding me. The migraine was gone, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a sound. I simply took one step back, pulled the door shut quickly, and slid the heavy deadbolt into place. Click. The sound was shockingly loud in the silence of the hallway. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock, sealing their fate. A startled, muffled shout came from inside the room. David realizing the sound wasn't the gentle closing of the wind, but the finality of imprisonment. He rattled the handle once, twice. I didn't wait for the inevitable, desperate pounding. I descended the stairs, my heels now forgotten, my stocking feet barely making a sound. My strategy was already laid out: neutralize the threat, secure the evidence, and involve the second victim. I walked straight to the kitchen counter, picked up the house phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a deep, confused voice answered. "Michael, it's me, David's wife," I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. I heard the faint clatter of keys on his end. Michael, Sarah's husband, was likely still at his law office downtown. "Oh, hey, I thought you were in a meeting," he replied, sounding rushed. "I need you to listen to me carefully," I interrupted, cutting through his pleasantry. I didn't give him time to object, to process, or to doubt. I came home early because of a migraine. David and Sarah are currently in my master bedroom. They are naked, and I have them locked inside. The line went utterly silent. I could hear his shallow, rapid breathing, the sound traveling across the distance between us. The news hit him, I knew, exactly as it had hit me. Not as a tragedy, but as a violent, shocking explosion. "Don't hang up," I commanded, when I heard him suck in a sharp breath, perhaps preparing to rage or deny. "I have video evidence, Michael. Undeniable. I need you to meet me here, immediately. We are going to address this, together, legally and strategically. Do you understand? I am giving you the choice to reclaim your power right now. Are you in?" His voice, when it finally came, was a raw, guttural whisper, completely stripped of the calm, professional authority he usually possessed. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let them out." The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, physically trapped, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. It was the blue folder. That mundane detail, a simple folder containing the signed contracts for the merger, became the single logistical error that saved my life. Or at least, the remnants of my sanity. I was already halfway to downtown Chicago, running late for the 10 a.m. board presentation, when the cold realization hit me. The contracts were still sitting on the kitchen counter. Non-negotiable, essential, forgotten. Frustration won out over pride. I called my assistant, muttered something about an unavoidable delay, and spun the car around, racing back toward the quiet suburban street that housed my supposedly perfect life. Pulling into the driveway usually brought a sense of familiar comfort, a deep sigh of relief. Today it brought a chill. David's sedan was parked awkwardly near the hedge, half hidden. He was supposed to be across town, tied up in meetings until late afternoon. I tried to rationalize it. A quick lunch break, a forgotten document, a mild flu. But then I noticed the front door wasn't properly latched. It was slightly ajar, invitingly, carelessly open. That was unlike him. That was unlike us. I stepped inside the foyer, and the silence hit me first. It wasn't the quiet of an empty house. It was the dense, pressurized stillness of a moment suspended, a secret being fiercely protected. Then came the smell. It was sickly sweet, a jarring, expensive floral note that battled aggressively with the familiar scent of our clean laundry and faint cedar. It was Sarah's perfume. My neighbor Sarah, the woman who came over every Tuesday for coffee, who watered my plants when we traveled, who had hugged me just last week and said, "You and David are the definition of couple goals, Amelia." A knot of absolute terror tightened in my stomach, replacing the initial annoyance over the contracts. My mind, usually a precise machine, stalled completely. I didn't consciously decide to walk upstairs. My feet simply began to move, silent on the thick carpet. Every step was deliberate, heavy with increasing dread. The silence of the house was now screaming, and I was climbing toward the source of the noise. I reached the landing. The door to our master bedroom, the sanctuary where David had promised me forever under the California moonlight, was slightly ajar. A thin strip of light spilled out, cutting across the hallway rug. My hand hovered over the cool brass knob. I didn't knock. I didn't take a breath. I just pushed the heavy oak door open slowly, deliberately, giving myself time to register the impossible geometry of the scene before me. The sight was not a wild, drunken fumble. It was worse. It was mundane, comfortable, established. David was sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me, wearing only his trousers, his shirt discarded on the floor by his feet. Sarah, my neighbor, the definition of cozy familiarity, was leaning against the headboard, her face flushed, adjusting the neckline of her blouse with sickening casual precision. The sheets were rumpled, the air thick with their recent easy intimacy. The true shock wasn't the near nakedness. It was the look of bored satisfaction on David's face moments before he heard the door creak. They froze. David's smug look evaporated, replaced by a pure white terror that washed the color from his face. Sarah's expression collapsed into immediate, pathetic guilt. For a split second, I saw their whole world, my world, shatter. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't grant them the dignity of witnessing my hysteria. An arctic calm descended upon me, freezing the rage in my throat and the tears in my eyes. I reached into my pocket, my movements slow and precise, pulled out my phone, and tapped the video recording icon. "Don't move," I said, my voice shockingly level, devoid of any recognizable emotion. It was the voice of a CEO addressing a poor quarterly report, not a betrayed wife. I filmed them slowly, panning over the room, the discarded clothes, the rumpled bed, and then, lingeringly, their horrified naked faces. This wasn't for blackmail. This was for accountability. This was my shield. When the recording was complete, I stepped back, never taking my eyes off the pair. David started stammering, pushing himself off the bed, stumbling toward me. "Wait, listen. It's not what it looks like, Amelia." I cut him off by slamming the heavy door shut, sealing the betrayal inside the room where it belonged. The lock clicked with a definite, echoing finality. I leaned against the door, focusing only on the sound of the metal bolt securing them within their little prison of shame. They were trapped. The evidence was secured. The time for emotion was over. The time for strategy had begun. David wasn't the only one who had a marriage to destroy. Sarah was married to Mark, a man of integrity, a man who, unlike David, was truly a friend. I walked downstairs, past the forgotten blue folder that had sent me on this detour. It seemed utterly insignificant now. I sat down on the bottom step and dialed Mark's number. My hands didn't shake. "Mark," I started, skipping the pleasantries, my voice low and steady. "I need you to come to my house immediately. No, don't ask questions. It involves Sarah and David. And yes, I confirmed, anticipating the question he hadn't even voiced yet. It's exactly what you think it is. The silence on the other end was profound, the sound of a man trying to reconcile his entire reality with two delivered sentences. His initial confusion gave way to a chilling, primal rage. He demanded details, his voice cracking with disbelief and sudden, terrible certainty. I gave him the minimal necessary information, delivered with the cold precision of a surgeon. They are currently locked in my master bedroom, I explained. David is wearing only his trousers. Sarah is adjusting her blouse. You need to see this with your own eyes, Mark. I'm on my way. He had choked out, his authority dissolving into panic. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let them out. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, physically trapped. But the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. The day started like any other Tuesday, but the universe apparently had other plans for my rigid schedule. I was cruising down the 610 loop, already thinking about the pitch I had scheduled for noon, when the familiar, crushing throb began behind my right eye. It wasn't just a headache. It was a full-blown, incapacitating cluster migraine, the kind that steals your vision and your coherence. I knew instantly I couldn't sit through a 3-hour presentation. I called my assistant, rescheduled the entire afternoon, and decided to retreat. All I craved was the blessed darkness and silence of our massive, quiet home in River Oaks. David had texted earlier saying his lunch meeting was running late, probably stretching into the mid-afternoon, which meant I had the house entirely to myself. Peace, quiet, and oblivion. That was the only strategy left. I pulled into the pristine, manicured driveway, punching the code into the garage keypad. The door lifted with its usual low rumble, and that's when the first spike of pure, inexplicable anxiety hit me, cutting through the pain of the migraine. David's black Lexus was parked squarely in his spot. He was home early. His meeting must have wrapped up quickly, I reasoned, trying to quell the rising nausea. But the instant I stepped out of my car, the air felt thick, heavy, and too still. The house was unnervingly quiet. No sound of the television, no music, no movement upstairs. The temperature, usually kept at a sensible 75 degrees, was Arctic. I shivered, shedding my blazer as I crossed the threshold into the foyer. Then came the scent. It was overwhelming, cloying, utterly foreign to our usual atmosphere of clean linen and my favorite sandalwood incense. It was a heavy, sweet, floral perfume, expensive and entirely too potent. It was Sarah's perfume. Our neighbor, Sarah. The woman who came over every Sunday for mimosas and talked about her children's terrible school projects. I froze on the first step of the staircase, the throbbing behind my eye momentarily forgotten, replaced by a cold, metallic taste of dread. Every fiber of my intuition screamed that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong. I told myself I was being absurd. Maybe Sarah had stopped by to drop off a casserole. Maybe David was simply in his office, struggling with a cold. Yet, I moved like a predator stalking through tall grass, silent and deliberate, my leather heels making no sound on the runner as I ascended to the second floor. The silence only amplified the frantic, panicked drumming of my heart. I reached the landing, turning the corner toward the master suite. The door, the grand, heavy oak door that separated our sanctuary from the rest of the world, was slightly ajar. Not open, not closed, just resting, teasing the edges of the frame. I didn't call out David's name. I didn't announce my presence. I simply placed my hand on the cool brass handle and pushed the door inward, slow enough to register the horror, fast enough to catch them in the act. The sight was not a whisper of doubt, but a full-throated, brutal confirmation. David, my husband, the keeper of my secrets and my heart, was there. And Sarah, my smiling, deceitful friend, was with him. The details of their position are irrelevant, secondary to the sheer visual assault of the betrayal. It wasn't just the physical intimacy, shocking as that was. It was the casual, brazen comfort they shared, the look of utter, selfish abandon on their faces that dissolved into sudden, paralyzing terror when they saw me standing in the doorway. It was the realization that this was not a lapse. This was a routine, a mockery performed in the very center of my security. The migraine disappeared, replaced by a perfect crystalline numbness. The primal urge to scream, to weep, to claw at the walls never surfaced. Instead, the CEO in me, the ruthless crisis manager who has closed deals worth millions, took over instantly. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and silently activated the video camera. I didn't say a word. I simply held the lens steady, capturing their panicked movements, their attempts to cover themselves, their guilt written in neon across their suddenly pale faces. I recorded David stammering something that sounded like a meaningless plea, Sarah whimpering, pulling a silk sheet around her. I filmed until I was absolutely certain I had undeniable, irrefutable proof. When I was satisfied, I lowered the phone. My voice, usually warm and resonant, came out as a whisper of polished granite. "Don't move," I said, the command echoing with terrifying authority. I took one strategic step back, pulling the heavy oak door closed with a decisive, echoing thud. I reached for the spare key hidden in the planter outside the door, a trick I had used 1,000 times when I'd forgotten my keys inside, and turned the lock with a sharp, metallic click. They were trapped. My body was already moving, strategizing, calculating the optimal destruction ratio. This wasn't a domestic squabble. It was a hostile takeover of my life, and I was responding with calculated surgical force. There would be no shouting, no tearful confrontation. This required a legal team, financial protection, and most importantly, strategic exposure. If they wanted to burn my world down, they would watch theirs ignite first. I walked straight to the kitchen, my feet moving with unnerving speed, and picked up the house phone. I scrolled past my lawyer, past my mother, until I found the name I needed. Richard, Sarah's husband, David's trusted colleague. The man who was currently sitting in his office downtown, blissfully ignorant of the catastrophe brewing in his own home and mine. I took one final, steadying breath, the smell of Sarah's cheap betrayal still clinging to my skin, and pressed call. "Hello, Richard," I said, my voice impossibly calm, the voice of pure, cold inevitability. "I am deeply sorry to interrupt your workday, but you need to come home immediately. Something terrible has happened. It involves Sarah and David, and you need to witness this with your own eyes." He was confused, hesitant, asking if everything was okay. I cut him off, my tone dropping to a sharp, menacing urgency. "Richard, stop asking questions. If you value your marriage, your dignity, and the future solvency of your family, you will leave your office right now and meet me at my house. They are here. I have them locked in the bedroom." The silence on the other end was the sound of a man's reality crumbling, piece by agonizing piece. When he finally spoke, his authority dissolving into panic, his voice was tight and strained. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let them out." The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, physically trapped, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon, and I was just getting started. The pressure behind my eyes was a crushing, relentless vice. I had tried to power through the board meeting downtown, but the migraine had escalated from a dull ache to a blinding, debilitating force. I excused myself abruptly, claiming a sudden flu, a lie that would ironically save me. All I wanted was the darkness of our bedroom in Naperville and the prescription painkiller locked away in my nightstand. That necessity, that sheer physical pain, was the illogical, merciful twist of fate that led me home 2 hours earlier than expected. I pulled my car into the driveway, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, a sound that usually felt welcoming. Today, it felt intrusive. My pulse stumbled when I saw David's silver sedan parked not in the street space he usually reserved for visitors, but directly in the driveway, crookedly, hastily pulled in. He had told me he was taking meetings at the office all day. A tiny, icy shard of dread pierced the controlled exhaustion of my headache. I tried to reason it away. Maybe he forgot his wallet. Maybe he ran home for a quick lunch. But the house was silent, too silent for someone just passing through. I let myself in, closing the door softly. The air hit me immediately, thick and suffocating. It wasn't the familiar warm scent of our home, not my vanilla candle, not David's earthy aftershave. It was a potent, aggressive floral perfume. Sarah's perfume. My neighbor, Sarah's perfume. The scent I had smelled countless times. Overshared coffee, completely out of place in my foyer. The floorboards didn't creak as I moved, a small blessing. My senses sharpened instantly, overriding the pain in my skull. I was no longer a sick woman seeking medicine. I was an investigator tracking a terrible, silent truth. The silence of the house magnified the muffled sounds coming from upstairs. A low murmur, a sudden, high-pitched giggle that was quickly stifled. The sounds came from our bedroom. Our sanctuary. I gripped the banister, climbing the stairs slowly, deliberately, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. It felt like I was moving through thick water. Every step was a decision, every breath a sacrifice. I reached the landing. The door to the master suite was not fully closed. A slim, dishonest gap beckoned me forward. I paused, breathing deep the sickeningly sweet air now thick with the unmistakable scent of cheap lust and betrayal. I didn't push the door open, with force. I simply nudged it with the tip of my finger, allowing the silence to swallow the click of the latch. The world shattered, but only for a millisecond. The sight was sickeningly ordinary, which made the violation exponentially worse. David, my husband of 14 years, was there, entangled with Sarah, my supposed friend. The colors, the pale blue of the duvet cover, the blinding white of their skin, the cheap synthetic gold of Sarah's hair, spun into a dizzying vortex of betrayal. They jumped, startled, like caught children, their faces morphing instantly from reckless pleasure into sheer paralyzing horror as they saw me standing motionless in the doorway. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the keys. I didn't cry. The migraine, the exhaustion, the pain, all of it vanished, replaced by an arctic, absolute clarity. I felt nothing except the terrifying precision of a surgeon about to make a critical incision. My hand found the phone, already in my pocket. With the smooth, practiced motion of someone who uses technology daily, I opened the camera app and switched to video. I didn't say a word. I held the phone steady, letting the lens capture the scene. David scrambling for the sheet, Sarah covering her face with a hand still adorned with her wedding ring, their gasping confusion. My silence was louder, colder, more terrifying than any scream I could have mustered. "Jane, wait," David finally managed, his voice raw with fear. I didn't wait. I took 2 deliberate steps into the room, ensuring the camera had a wide, damning angle. And then I stepped back out. I didn't bother locking eyes with either of them. My purpose was purely technical. I pulled the heavy mahogany door shut with a solid thud. The sound echoed the finality of our marriage. I turned the key quickly, decisively, hearing the metallic click of the deadbolt engaging. A moment later, I heard their desperate pounding, their muffled shouts of disbelief and panic. "Open the door, Jane! This isn't what it looks like!" David screamed, his voice strained. But I knew exactly what it looked like. It looked like the end. I leaned against the wall, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The migraine was gone, replaced by a cold, adrenaline-fueled focus. I pulled out my phone again, scrolled through my contacts, and found the name I needed. Mark, Sarah's husband. A man who, until 2 minutes ago, had shared weekly barbecues with us and helped David fix the faulty sprinkler system. I walked downstairs, my footsteps heavy and measured, finding a quiet corner in the kitchen, far away from the desperate chaos echoing behind the locked door upstairs. Mark answered on the second ring, his voice sounding cheerfully exhausted. "Hey, Jane. Everything okay? You sound—" I cut him off, my voice steady, devoid of inflection. I spoke only facts. "Mark, this is Jane. I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not interrupt me." I waited for his stunned silence. "I came home early. Your wife Sarah is currently in my master bedroom, naked, with my husband David. I have them locked in. I have video proof. I need you to drive here now, without calling Sarah or David, and without alerting anyone else. If you want a clean, fast divorce, you need to be here to witness this firsthand. Don't waste time." The silence on the other end was absolute, crushing. Then, the sound of a sharp, involuntary gasp. It was the sound of a man's world collapsing. He didn't ask if I was lying. He didn't question the absurdity. He simply understood the terrifying certainty in my voice. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he managed, his voice tight and strained. Don't let them out. The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, physically trapped. But the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. The presentation was set for 3, but at precisely 1:15 p.m., a crushing migraine hit me, a blinding, pulsing agony behind my left eye that no amount of coffee or sheer willpower could fight. It was a physical rebellion against the perfect structure of my day, and it forced me to abandon the high-rise office building in downtown Dallas. I told my assistant I was heading home for a few hours, promising to review the crucial Q3 documents remotely once the medication kicked in. It was a necessary surrender, a minor inconvenience in an otherwise pristine life. I had no idea that migraine was a gift from the universe, saving me from a far greater pain later, by forcing me to face the immediate, visceral betrayal. As I pulled my Lexus into the familiar curve of our driveway, the first prickle of unease started low in my gut. David's sleek black sedan was parked oddly close to the garage door. He had explicitly told me he was locked in meetings all afternoon, a grueling series of pitches with potential clients downtown. Seeing his car, usually a comforting sight, now felt like a stone dropped into perfectly still water. I dismissed it instantly. Maybe he forgot his laptop. Maybe he came home for a quick change of clothes. That was the thing about blind trust. It provided endless, flimsy excuses. I grabbed my purse, the headache pounding in rhythm with my pulse, and let myself in through the front door. The house, usually bustling with the ambient hum of technology and the soft noise of the air conditioning, was dead silent. A silence that pressed against my ears, unnatural and heavy. I kicked off my heels in the marble foyer, noting the conspicuous absence of the dog, who usually greeted me with frantic enthusiasm. David must have locked him in the laundry room to keep him quiet. Then, the smell hit me. Not the faint trace of ozone after a rain shower that I loved, nor the clean scent of the linen spray I used. This was cheap, synthetic, overtly floral, a heavy saccharine perfume that choked the air. It was Sarah's signature scent. My neighbor, the woman I shared iced tea with on our patio, the woman whose children played in my backyard, the woman David always described as just a friend of the neighborhood. My feet moved without conscious direction, pulling me toward the stairs. Each step upward was a countdown. The headache vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity, a cold surge of adrenaline that made my fingers tremble. I saw Sarah's bright green sandals tucked neatly beneath the hallway console, the ones she wore yesterday. My breath hitched, a painful, shallow gasp. This wasn't a sudden, fleeting mistake. This was planned. They weren't just meeting. I stood before our bedroom door, the heavy oak mocking me with its perfect stillness. I raised my hand, but hesitated. I didn't want to open it. Part of me, the woman who believed in our 10 years, our life, our promised future, prayed that the smell was a mistake, that Sarah was just borrowing a book. But the scent, now overwhelming, radiated from beneath the door. I pushed the door inward, slowly, without knocking. The world shattered, but I didn't scream. The air rushed out of my lungs, leaving me hollow. There they were, entangled in the white duvet, a grotesque parody of intimacy. Sarah's face, usually so familiar and friendly, contorted in a mix of panic and shame as she saw me. David, my husband, the man whose ring I wore, froze, his eyes wide and blank, like a deer caught in headlights. The colors of the room, the soft gray walls, the light filtering through the sheer curtains, suddenly seemed too vivid, too obscene against the tableau of betrayal. My shock wasn't the searing fire of rage I expected. It was the icy, perfect calm of absolute psychological breakdown. I felt nothing, only the detached observer watching a terrible drama unfold. My hand automatically dropped into my purse, retrieving my phone. I held it up, steady, aimed directly at the center of the bed. They scrambled, making aborted movements toward the sheets, whimpering apologies that were already irrelevant. They didn't need to speak. The scene spoke volumes. "Don't move," I said, my voice shockingly low and even. It didn't sound like my voice at all. It was the voice of pure strategy. "Don't cover yourselves. Don't touch anything." They obeyed, paralyzed by the camera lens pointed at them. I filmed everything. The sheets, Sarah's discarded floral dress thrown over the chaise lounge, David's Rolex resting on the key, nightstand, and their faces, contorted with realization that I was not collapsing. I was documenting. This wasn't a confrontation. It was evidence collection. Once I had sufficient footage, the definitive time-stamped proof of their shared dishonor, I lowered the phone and took a single step back, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me. I didn't slam it. I simply clicked the lock, a decisive mechanical sound that echoed the finality in my soul. They were now physically trapped in the scene of their crime. My next move was not fueled by emotion, but by tactical necessity. I needed an ally, and I knew exactly who deserved to see this performance. I pulled out my phone again, my fingers flying over the contact list. Mark, Sarah's husband. David's golfing partner. I stepped into the hallway and called him. He answered on the second ring, his tone jovial, slightly preoccupied. "Hey, David. Everything okay?" Sarah mentioned she was out running. Errands. The sound of his normal, unsuspecting voice was a fresh wave of agony, but it solidified my resolve. I took a deep, steadying breath. "Mark," I articulated, ensuring every syllable was cold steel. "This isn't David, it's Emma." The joviality instantly vanished. "Emma? What's wrong?" "I am at my house. David is here, and so is Sarah. They are currently locked in my bedroom." I didn't soften the blow. I delivered the truth like a bullet. "I have video proof. You need to come here right now, Mark. I am giving you 20 minutes before I call the police for trespassing and public indecency." The silence on the other end was vast and terrifying. I could hear his world crumbling in the sudden, sharp intake of his breath. "Locked? You locked them in?" he finally managed, his voice tight and strained. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he continued, the words now laced with a terrifying, controlled fury matching my own. "Don't let them out." The alliance was formed. The transaction was set. David and Sarah might be locked in my room, physically trapped, but the trap I had set had just sprung wide open on their entire world. The clock had started ticking, and in a few short minutes, the audience for their final, humiliating performance would arrive. My cold precision was my armor. The truth was my weapon. And I was just getting started. The chill that settled over me was absolute, a powerful anesthetic against the screaming pain inside. With David and Sarah secured behind the locked door, the silence in my living room was deafening. A perfect stage for the next act. I wasn't shaking anymore. My hands were steady as I retrieved David's briefcase from the study, knowing his phone would be inside, charging. I didn't need to guess the password. It was our anniversary date, a sickening irony. The screen lit up, and there it was, the digital paper trail of their corrosive little fantasy. I didn't stop at the recent texts. I scrolled back, tracing the affair not over weeks, but over nearly 8 months. 8 months of shared holidays, family dinners, and whispered "I love yous," while this calculated, cruel deception festered. But the sheer volume of betrayal wasn't what truly broke the seal of my remaining compassion. It was the tone. They hadn't just been exchanging illicit messages. They were mocking me. Did you see how proud she looked showing off the A? New landscaping. Bless her heart. She has no idea we were watching from the bedroom window. She's planning that trip to Maui. We should go there in the spring instead, babe. She loves believing she's my only focus. They laughed at my devotion, my domestic pride, my faith in our life. They hadn't just cheated. They had performed a comedy routine using my trust as the punchline. Reading those words felt like drinking poison. It was instant, absolute eradication of any lingering doubt or love. David wasn't a misguided partner. He was a cynical architect of pain. The doorbell rang precisely 3 minutes later. I took a deep, centering breath, shoving the phone deep into the pocket of my jeans. The timing was perfect. I opened the front door to Ed, Sarah's husband. His face was a mask of confusion and concern, having rushed over based on my cryptic, urgent call. "Amelia, what is it? Is everything okay?" Sarah didn't answer her phone. "Everything is far from okay, Ed," I said, my voice low and flat, devoid of emotion. I didn't invite him in. I simply turned and walked toward the bedroom door, beckoning him to follow. "They're in here. You need to see this." I unlocked the door, stepped back, and flipped on the overhead light. The scene was exactly as I had left it, disheveled, cheap, and undeniably damning. David, standing near the bed, buttoning his shirt hastily, and Sarah curled up on the edge of the mattress, looking physically ill. Ed didn't scream or roar. He just stood in the doorway, absorbing the reality. The silence was the most brutal weapon. David, recovering quickly, launched into the minimization script. Ed, Amelia, listen to me. This was a mistake. A terrible, stupid, drunken lapse in judgment. It meant nothing. Sarah lifted her head, her eyes pleading. It was only once, Ed. We were struggling. We didn't know what we were doing. I stepped forward, planting myself directly between them and Ed. My voice was amplified by the sheer force of controlled fury. 8 months, I stated, pulling out David's phone and holding it up. 8 months of planning, plotting, and laughing at the expense of our families. I have every message, every picture, every detail of your pathetic little love nest documented. Do you still want to stick with, "It was only once," David? Because I'm recording this whole conversation, and lying now will only deepen the felony of marital misconduct. They stared at the phone, the color draining from their faces. The casual cruelty of their digital lives was now their inescapable witness. We were confused, David whispered, the bravado gone, replaced by the terror of a man watching his life collapse in real time. I didn't look at him. I looked at Ed, whose face had hardened into granite. Ed, I believe you have everything you need. As for me, I turned, facing David directly for the first time since the discovery. The lawyers have been notified. The divorce papers are filed. Our assets, David, are protected by the prenup you signed, which you clearly forgot about. I have changed the digital locks on every single door and window of this house 15 minutes ago. Your keys are useless. His jaw dropped. Amelia, you can't be serious. Where am I supposed to go? That, David, is no longer my concern, I said, my voice cutting through the air like ice. A moving crew will arrive tomorrow at noon to collect your personal items under supervision. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather what you can carry and leave my property. Do not, under any circumstance, attempt to contact me or step foot on this street again. I stood aside, allowing them to pass. Sarah fled first, pulling her dress down, refusing to meet Ed's eyes. Ed followed her, silent, the betrayal having taken his voice. David paused at the door, trying one last, desperate appeal. Amelia, please, we can talk about this. I didn't utter another word. I simply pointed to the door. He left. He walked out of the life we built together carrying nothing but a coat and his shame. The moment the front door closed, I felt the monumental weight of the last 8 months lift. It wasn't relief. It was a profound, chilling silence. The silence of a battlefield after the final shot has been fired. The house was mine again. Months became a year. The divorce was swift, clean, and entirely in my favor, thanks to the undeniable proofs and the immediate legal action. I didn't mourn the marriage. I mourned the loss of the life I thought I had. But time is the most honest healer. I gutted the house, physically and spiritually. The bedroom became a stunning home office, bathed in sunlight. I sold the car David loved and bought a little red roadster that felt entirely mine. I traveled to places David always vetoed, learned, to scuba dive in the Maldives, and finally launched the consulting business I had put on hold for years. The woman who discovered the betrayal that day was brittle and shocked. The woman who stood here now was rebuilt, stronger, and fundamentally free. The ultimate test came one dreary afternoon in downtown Boston. I was waiting for an Uber outside a high-rise office building, bundled up against the autumn wind, texting my new business partner. Then I saw him. David. He was Asino, standing across the street, waiting for the light to change. He looked heavier, stressed. His tailored suit now seemed ill-fitting. His eyes, scanning the crowd, looked dull and anxious. He was just another ordinary, slightly miserable man in a sea of commuters. Our eyes met across the asphalt. He registered me immediately. A flicker of something, regret, guilt, fear, crossed his face. He started to move, perhaps to cross the street, perhaps to offer one of his familiar, worthless excuses. And I felt nothing. No rage, no pain, no desire for revenge, only a blank, cool indifference. He was a stranger, a distant, unsuccessful business transaction. The chapter was closed, the book was put away. I didn't break eye contact, but I didn't acknowledge him either. I simply turned back to my phone as my Uber arrived, stepped in, and told the driver to proceed. He was still standing there when the car pulled away, stuck waiting for a light that would never change for him again. My dear listeners, if you are hearing this now, perhaps you are in the middle of your own battle, staring down a betrayal that feels like the end of the world. Let me tell you this: the way they treat you is a reflection of their character, not yours. Your worth is not determined by the loyalty of the person beside you. Betrayal is merely a terrible clearing of the path. It burns down the illusion so you can finally see the sturdy foundation you stand on, the one they never noticed, because they were too busy looking down at you. You are strong enough to change the locks, change the narrative, and change your life. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for an apology. Take your power back now. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me where you are listening from. Drop your city and time in the comments below. And remember, the best revenge is always building a life so beautiful, they become completely irrelevant.